Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very special event. You're joining us here today for a take on the second GOP debate through an objectivist lens with Atlas Society senior scholar and professor of political economy at Duke University, Dr. Richard Salsman. So we're going to go through some of the highlights of the debate. We're going to play some clips. I'll ask Dr. Salsman some questions, get his perspective as a longtime objectivist on the policy stances of these candidates and what he thinks about the debate overall. And I'll maybe give a little bit of my perspective from a young person's point of view on these candidates and where they're at. And at the end, we will take some questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get started here. Richard, I know you wanted to start us off with a note on how we can evaluate these candidates from an objective point of view.
Yeah, I thought I would just spend a minute or two, Abby. Thank you for organizing all this. Before we get into the weeds of what some of these people will be saying on stage, and it's somewhat driven by the moderators as well in their questions. But I just wanted to lay out a couple of ideas about how to judge political candidates or political parties, political platforms, not to get too theoretical about this, but if this audience, as I suspect, is either objectivist, libertarian, conservative, we care about freedom, we love America, we care about constitutionally limited government. When we see any of these parties up on stage, we might cringe a lot and say, oh my gosh, they're so far away from me. And you judge them maybe improperly without context by saying, well, they're not close to my ideal. And but a practical decision has to be made, who to support or not, what party to support or not, as I said. So I think in laying out just basic principles, in this particular case, Trump is not on stage, but is way ahead in the polls. So just in judging this particular performance, you have to keep in mind, what are they saying on these issues relative to Trump's positions? Because if they differ at all from him, that's interesting. If they agree with him, then, but the question of whether he is going to be the main candidate anyway, maybe lowers the value of this. But you can also look at these candidates as future Republicans. Even if Trump wins, he's only there 4 years. And all these people on stage could be there again 4 years from now. So it's interesting to analyze them from that standpoint. The other thing I would say is, since we have this standard of capitalism, and that's the best system, and they're not there, what you have to listen for is, are any of them advocating policies or philosophies or ideologies that move in that direction, at least? We have a mixed system. Most of them are going to be mixed. But what you're looking for is people who will speak well of liberty, of the founders, of constitutionalism, of capitalism. And so that's important. But even that's not enough. You have to also, for practical purposes, ask, can they actually win? So, you could have a pure objectivist up on stage, but if they're not going to win, it's not really valuable. Last thing I've noticed, some of the best presidents served in executive positions, meaning they were governors. Reagan was a governor of California for 2 years, but it doesn't even have to be a big state. Clinton was a decent president. He was governor of Arkansas for a couple sessions. Those who are senators or something less, who aren't in a position of, dealing with the three branches, tend to be inferior. So there are some governors on this stage, among them DeSantis. There's others who are not, but that's another criteria I look for on either political party. The governors are going to be better candidates. So I'll stop there, Abby. Those are just some suggestions of kind of rules of thumb for judging these things.
Yeah, and we have our CEO, Jennifer Grossman, here with us, who was at the debate. So
Great.
I don't know, Mike, if you wanted to jump in with some first-person perspective, maybe, of the debate.
Sure. Yeah, it was sort of a little last-minute development. My friend Kellyanne Conway was there and managed to snag me a seat with her. She and I go back to the very early 1990s when we were both getting our careers started in Washington, D.C. And then over the years, even at Dole Food Company, I hired her polling firm to help us with some questions about packaging and branding and messaging. So it's really great to just have these friendships that take you through many, many different eras. And so this was my second debate at the Reagan Library. So I had been at the debate that they had there in 2016. And obviously, one of the big differences was that Trump was not on stage, and yet at the same time he was. As you saw, a lot of the fire was directed towards Trump. It wasn't just Chris Christie, and so in terms of the audience reaction, I was a bit surprised by how much applause those lines received. I mean, even though there was a lot of Trump supporters in the audience, people seemed to feel like, yeah, he should be here and he should be answering the questions and showing respect to the voters. I thought that overall, Mike Pence appeared to be like a deflated balloon. He almost didn't seem like he wanted to be there. He was talking very slowly, which was kind of strange. And he found himself kind of betwixt and between. He wanted to defend the positive parts of the Trump-Pence record, but at the same time, highly critical of his former boss. I thought that Nikki Haley had the probably the most positive reactions from the audience. People really appreciated the substantive answers that she gave. She's just kind of drilling down on what kinds of policy solutions that she would pursue. I thought she was extremely quick on her feet. I thought she was aggressive and appropriately aggressive in terms of, even when Tim Scott came after her, which was interesting, she said, bring it, and so I think just aside from the specifics, the concretes of what she was talking about, I thought she brought a vibe. Overall, I would say that I was very impressed by almost everybody, that they were prepared. I mean, they really had done their homework. They'd clearly been in debate prep, and I think that it showed. Vivek, who had come out of the previous debate with a lot of stardust all around him, he did not seem to do as well, in part, but there were a lot of attacks against him. Doug Bergrum, I also thought, did well. He was the only one to really talk about capitalism and capital markets and intervention therein, and had, I think, the best answer on the UAW strikes, because everybody was kind of falling all over themselves to show their populist bona fides by standing with the striking workers. That was, I thought, overall kind of a through note that I always find very unappealing in presidential campaigns, when people are, trying to, going back to Hillary Clinton, and, we had our dining room table that was a door. Michelle Obama, we were driving this clunker and we could see the road from holes in the car. And I felt like DeSantis's bio did that a lot. I hail from, blue collar parents, and others tried to get in on that act. That was one of the first things that struck me as different about Trump, and that I thought was a positive very early on in his first campaign, that he was not trying to pretend that he was, a man of the people. He was like, I'm rich. It's great to be rich. Let's figure out how to get more people, enjoying in the wealth of the capitalist system. So those were some of my kind of notes from being on the ground, in terms of and talking to the other people who were there afterwards. I think the general feeling was that people felt very good about Nikki Haley, and one way or another, like Richard said, they'd love to see her as either as a candidate or as a vice presidential candidate. And that's something that I think can get kind of lost, because a lot of us, we're in the Twitter sphere or the X sphere, or we're kind of, in this performative space of social media and outrage and who can have the most purist positions. And she gets a lot of flack for some of her more moderate or establishment oriented positions. But just from a pure performance perspective, I thought she really did a superb job.
Gang, I just wanted to follow up and say, I like your emphasis on, well, not emphasis, but bringing in the idea of the performative aspect of it, or the style of what they're doing. We might call it charisma, because I think that's sometimes underplayed amongst us policy wonks. If we're really policy oriented, and I know some of us are out there, we're just like honing in on, well, is that the right policy position or not? But we're talking about a future possible president here. And it does have to be a combination of leadership skills and right principles and experience. These can't be neophytes either. That can be dangerous. But it's a mix of those three. Reagan had that, right? He had the performative aspect. He used to complain about how he combined acting with governing, but you got to have all of it. You can't have just pieces of it. So we should not downplay the theatrics, but you can't be clownish about it either. So
or you can, and it seemed to have worked as a formula for the front runner in the race to an extent. I've looked at a lot of research on charisma over the years, and one study that stuck out to me was one that looked at people who speak fast and that can answer things on the fly. For whatever reason, that came across as more charismatic to people. Obviously, Trump does that. I think that Nikki Haley, she did it. And even Chris Christie, who was just the big party pooper of the last round of debates, I don't know if his game got a little bit better. He had the best, I thought, put down of the entire thing when he was like, Vivek, put your hand down. That was devastating. But also, he has that, you get the feeling that he's saying what he thinks. DeSantis, who remains my preferred candidate, for all transparent reasons, and the biggest one of which was how he handled the pandemic and resisting the very destructive interventions and violations of civil liberties, which, by the way, President Trump did promote as well. So he was fine. I don't think he went up. He didn't go down. You kind of got the feeling that he wasn't trying to go up or go down. He was trying to survive the debate. I thought it was very mealy-mouthed on kind of dodging the abortion question. And I didn't get the sense from the people in that room, at least. And again, granted, there were a lot of people that were there for a particular candidate or donors or, Reagan Library supporters, but that was not their top issue at all. So
I think it was interesting. I noted he didn't talk until it was almost 25 minutes in. And I know they start with the lowest polling candidates, but he didn't try to insert himself too much, DeSantis. So it was interesting, his strategy, but I thought he did better than the last time around. So on that note, I know we're going to share some clips here. And we wanted to start with, they kicked off talking about these UAW strikes in Detroit. And obviously Biden went down there, and then Trump went down there strategically, probably right during the debates. And he noted that Biden wasn't planning to come to the UAW debates until it was on his schedule. So it was an interesting sidebar. And a lot of the people playing the debate were also playing clips of Trump's speech at the same time. I know I have a family full of big Trump supporters who did not watch the debates. They opted to watch Trump's speech instead. So in terms of who might be running for VP or, the sort of race for second place idea, I think you could see a little bit of that, but I was surprised at how many candidates did come out against Trump. And again, like you said, Jack, there was a lot of cheers for that. So that was an interesting reaction. But I think we're going to play some clips here of that first question and get your guys' response on the union strikes and how some of the candidates did. So we're going to start actually with Vivek Ramaswamy. He was the first one to say the infamous C word, as in capitalism, tonight, followed later by Doug. And I think Tim Scott were the only three to use that specific word and not just say free markets. So go ahead and play there, Lawrence.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you've said you really empathize with the strikers. You're standing next to Senator Scott. Do you agree with what he said, or do you think he's wrong?
I agree with some of what he said, for sure. I like the spirit of it. I'll say that I don't have a lot of patience for the union bosses. I think that's where he and I actually have a common view. I do have a lot of sympathy for the workers, however. People are going through real hardship in this country. I've been through hardship growing up. My father stared down layoffs at GE under Jack Welch's tenure at the GE plant in Evendale, Ohio. My mom had to work overtime in nursing homes in Southwest Ohio to make ends meet and pay off our home loan. So I understand that hardship is not a choice. But victimhood is a choice, and we choose to be victorious in the United States of America. You know what, if I was giving advice to those workers, I would say go picket in front of the White House in Washington, D.C. That's really where the protest needs to be. Disastrous economic policies that have driven up prices, that have driven up interest rates and mortgage rates. At the same time, wages remaining stagnant. What we need is to deliver economic growth in this country, unlock American energy, drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear energy, put people back to work by no longer paying them more money to stay at home, stabilize the US dollar itself, and rescind a majority of those unconstitutional federal regulations that are hampering our economy. That is how we unleash American exceptionalism. And that's not a Democratic vision or a Republican vision. That is an American vision, that we embrace economic growth, and capitalism is still the best system known to man to lift us up from poverty, and we should not apologize for it. That's what it means to be an American.
Abbie, I thought this was one of the best concise answers. It is also kind of his stump speech. So I found one of the problems with all these questions is that the answerers not being fearful that they would never get back to them on certain things, would try to jam all their views into one session. But so he did do that here, but he's really got this pattern down. I liked the capitalism mention. Notice it's a bit defensive in the sense of it's the best cure for poverty. All right, so there's an appeal to the altruist side of it, but he also said let not apologize for it. So first to use the word capitalism and to use it in a positive way, and then to say we should not be apologetic about it was very good, and also very controversial to say use all the energy sources, all of them, coal all the way to nuclear. So there's a lot of style in him. He obviously lacks the experience. He's not only not a governor, he's not a politician at all, but I thought this was a really good answer. By the way, neither him nor Scott, who preceded him, really hit the ball out of the park on the unions, because the answer I would again on the unions and the auto workers would be something like this. You have a president joining you on the picket line who's actually against your product, and he's actually against the fuel that drives your product. I mean, the man wants to abolish fossil fuels. He wants to abolish the combustion engine. He's subsidizing EV. And none of these guys took him on that. They should have said these workers should be on our side, including the CEOs, on our side, because we favor all kinds of different cars, and we're not favoring one or the other. We endorse the kind of cars you guys are making, and Joe Biden is not on your side. He's your enemy. Amazingly, none of them said that. They could have.
Yeah, and I think then you got, after this, we transitioned into this sort of stump question. I don't know if you guys caught it, where the moderator set up this sort of trick question. Do you support CEOs or American workers? Which is it? I mean, that was just a crazy question. I think we had a clip of that as well, but it just shows, I don't know which of, I think a lot of the moderators, aside from Dana Perino, were pretty biased, but it was interesting. Even in the Republican debates, you see this sense that you can't choose both. There is no. Yes.
And I don't know if you're going to show that clip or not. Yes, but it was Stuart Varney, who's on CNBC. He's the major, usually pro-capitalist anchor on one, not CNBC, on one of the Fox shows. And yes, he brought up this idea of, what about the fact that CEOs at the car companies make, 300 times what the workers are making? And the UAW head actually last week said, we're asking for a 40% pay increase because that's what the CEOs got. Well, I mean, that is the craziest theory of wage determination I've ever heard of. Like, you are not CEOs, you are not running these companies. Why is your pay going to be based on something else? But Stuart Varney is into, stressing this inequality, this alleged inequality problem. And he also said, I don't know if you caught this or not, what about the fact that 1%, the richest 1%, control 20% of the income? Now, I don't know about you, but if you've earned your income, of course you're controlling it. But it sounds like, this small sliver of the population, the dastardly 1%, have somehow seized other people's income. The fact that this is coming out of Fox Business moderators is interesting. Maybe they know better, maybe they don't. I noticed that as well. I don't know what do you want to play next, but.
Yeah, they never show the numbers for how much these companies pay out to their employees, or
Right.
how many people they employ.
And notice no one on stage is really going to defend inequality. But a couple of times someone, Vivek said at one point, we should encourage the best and the brightest, and we should, war and meritocracy. And so, well, that kind of implies that there's going to be unequal results. And someone on stage at least should suggest we don't have to apologize for that either, if it's earned.
Yeah. And
I was thinking about next week on Wednesday, I'm going to have Chris Stirewalt of the American Enterprise Institute, who used to work at Fox News, and he's talking about, just written a book about how the news is broken, and that it's no longer, the news. It's really about choosing your bias confirmation alternative, and how angry audiences get when you diverge from the kinds of questioning and views that they want to hear, and want the views they want to have confirmed. So, I don't necessarily think that those questions that were sort of playing up income inequality or whatever were necessarily coming from the, hearts of these moderators, and more, I think, trying to appeal not just to the Fox voters, but also to other people that might be watching, and also seeing how candidates will answer questions that they're going to get them. Maybe they're not going to get them from Fox viewers and voters, but they're going to get it from the left, and
I agree.
Majority of the kind of mainstream media.
Almost like they're prepping them for, well, you are going to get this in the general election. You are going to get this from other audiences. I agree with that. Yes, that could have been the motive.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. Lawrence, let's jump to the clip. We did talk a little bit about auto subsidies and electric vehicles, that clip at 2308, and see what we have to say here on these auto subsidies. I thought this was an interesting.
Yeah.
So I have to jump in because we're missing the point, and every other network is missing the point. The reason why people are striking in Detroit is because Joe Biden's interference with capital markets and with free markets. The subsidies, we're subsidizing the automakers, and we're subsidizing the cars, and a particular kind of car, not every car. We're subsidizing electric vehicles. And when you decide that we're going to take all of your taxpayer monies, take $1 billion, subsidize a certain type of vehicle, and the batteries come from China. China controls 85% of the rare earth minerals. They're called rare earth because they're measured in parts per million. China is moving 100,000 pounds of earth in Indonesia, in Africa. They're literally destroying the planet so that they can make a battery that's in a car subsidized here. That's why they're striking, because they need 2/3 less workers to build an electric car. Joe Biden, this strike is at Joe Biden's feet.
Well, I think in this case, he's right about this, but both parties have supported the subsidization of EV over the years. So unless he's willing to stay, or any of them are willing to stake out a position that says the government is not going to favor any kind of car, any particular type of car, by subsidies or tax breaks, or any particular kind of energy, they're not doing that. But I like the sentiment, at least. It's at least turning the angst of the workers back to government policy, not the exploitation of the capitalists, which is what the union bosses like to claim. So
I feel like he shot himself in the foot a little bit, don't you? Because he said that subsidies are bad, but then he brought it to the point of, oh, they need 2/3 less workers. So that's also why they're bad, which then goes to punishing, productivity and innovation. And so it's kind of not a tricky answer, I thought.
The other thing missing here, Abbie, is a little behind the scenes, but it's too bad that this kind of thing is in the headlines, because then it gets in the debate. Like, who cares whether the UAW is striking against Ford? Or it's really stupid. But if you want to bring up broader government labor policy, it's a fact that over the years, the labor unions have shifted to the public sector. I mean, 80% of unionists today are working for the government, not for these private car companies. So Tim Scott was right in the beginning when he was asked about this. Should the government intervene? I mean, should the president even be on a picket line taking sides? It's just outrageous. But let the private sector do what it wants, as long as you don't force people at the bargaining table. But the real problem is, and the teachers union are brought up later, 80% of union workers today are in the government, not going against private sector. That's a bigger problem, another issue.
Yeah, so then they moved on to talk a little bit about childcare. I don't know if we want to touch on that a little bit. It was interesting, I thought, that they were asking these Republican candidates what their stance was on the government, again, stepping in to, help people with childcare. So I think Tim Scott had a good answer here. Lawrence, if you want to play that clip at 2732, in the sense to cut taxes was the answer, and put more money in people's pockets. So.
The billions of dollars in pandemic era funding is going to end. and 70,000 daycares could close. So you had an effort to broaden eligibility for child care assistance. That fell apart last year. And for the moms and dads out there who are worried, what can you tell them if you weren't able to get it through the Congress? How could you do it as president?
Certainly one of the things I did as a member of Congress was to make sure that we protected the Head Start programs around the country, giving people the opportunity to pick and choose the place that they send their children. The challenges that we see today under the Biden administration is that the cost for daycare has gone over $15,000 per child. In the Build Back Broker plan, he called it a Build Back Better plan, it was going up to $29,000. The way we fix that problem is to make sure that we actually cut taxes and give more Americans their money back. When I helped write the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we actually lowered a single mother's taxes by 70% on the federal level, for dual income households by 60%. Then we went a step further. We doubled the child tax credit and made it refundable. By doing that, more parents had more resources to make the decisions how to take care of their family. The one thing we should do is let the American people keep their money.
I stopped there, yeah.
Well, my first reaction, I don't have as positive a reaction to this as you do, even though I'm all for lower taxes. The broader picture here, and you hear lower taxes a lot, is they never, the Republican Party, and they have to start doing this, they never talk about reducing spending. And later, when there's a discussion of inflation and budget deficits and the Federal Reserve printing money for the difference, they're blaming inflation, but on what? They're cutting taxes and creating a larger budget deficit. More debt for the Fed to monetize. So, and notice also he mentions two things which are government involvement in childcare. One of them is the Head Start program, which last time I checked today, it's $12 billion a year. The federal government says $12 billion a year on that. I think the program started under LBJ or later. And the child tax credit, I mean, using the tax system to try to manipulate behavior, both of those things should be abolished or at least phased out. But, you know, they're not going to go there because then they're going to be accused of being anti-child. But I think the last thing we need is the federal government involved in child care. I mean, in a way, they're already involved in child care. It's called public schools. And what are they doing? They're intellectually lobotomizing children. They're causing mass illiteracy and mass innumeracy. That's actually brought up later in the debate, where people are criticizing the quality of public schools, and yet at the same time they're very bullish about what the government can do with childcare. In my view, childcare should entirely be left to the free market. But again, my standards in the beginning were don't trash these people for not being perfect. But here the answer I think should have been, can we at least move in the direction of phasing the government out of parental relationships with their children? The free market can handle childcare, just like it can handle every other, important service that people need.
Yeah. And again, these daycares benefited from these subsidies, and now they're going to be going out of business because they were taking all this government money. They were not really self-sufficient. Yeah. So we're going to see government messing up again and irresponsible spending maybe on the part of some of these daycares. But we've shown some clips now from candidates who probably don't have a chance. So let's get into some candidates. I know Jag felt that Nikki Haley did really well. When we got into this conversation about immigration, they spent a decent amount of time on immigration. And a lot of the candidates like Vivek and a couple other candidates were talking about putting National Guard on the border. Nikki Haley did not mention putting National Guard on the border, but she mentioned, increasing Border Patrol and ICE. Thought she had a kind of nice answer. If we could play starting at 3242 Lawrence and see how far we get there.
Illegal immigrants are coming from countries south of the border. You've seen the Fox News drone. It's captured this steady stream of people coming into the country on a daily basis. In fact, I believe we have a live picture of it tonight. That is happening right now, live. In the last decade, the U.S. has spent nearly $55 billion to address the root causes of migration. But crime, poverty, and corruption, they persist, and the number of migrants is only growing. Are we wasting our money?
Well, what happens is when Joe Biden waved the green flag, it told everybody to come. And now we've seen 6 million people cross the border. We've had more fentanyl that have killed Americans in the Iraq, Vietnam, or Afghanistan wars combined. We need to make sure that we are a country of laws. The second we stop being a country of laws, we give up everything this country was founded on. So we have to secure the border. The way we do that is, first of all, defund sanctuary cities. You see what's happening in Philadelphia right now. It's got to stop. We need to make sure we put 25,000 more Border Patrol and ICE agents on the ground and let them do their job. I spent 400 miles down that border, and I'm telling you, Border Patrol agents aren't allowed to do their job. Let's go back to remain in Mexico policy. Instead of catch and release, let's go to catch and deport.
What about
and
the aid that what about the aid that federal taxpayers are paying to deal with the root causes? It's not working.
The only aid that we should be spending right now is to secure the border, the southern border, the northern border, period. We need to keep Americans safe. And right now, Americans are not safe. Only when we fix the immigration system, only when we get the border secure, should we ever look at putting any more money into this. Our money should be about keeping Americans safe. We're not doing that. Joe Biden's not doing that. And you mentioned Congress and shutting down government. I'll make it clear. We have to change the budget process in 4 years. In 40 years. Congress has only delivered a budget on time 4 times in 40 years. Right. If they don't keep the government open, they should not get paid. No pay, no budget.
You know, Abbie, immigration did come up a lot. That's a good excerpt. It came up a couple of other times. I just wanted to lay out that what I have found over the and since the Reagan amnesty of the mid-'80s, very sadly, the two parties have come down to a false alternative. Democrats are for complete open borders. I think they're doing it on the cynical view that they'll all be future Democratic voters. I don't think that's necessarily true. Regardless, the problem is to push back. The Republicans have gone the other way, and they sound very authoritarian, close the borders, build a wall. It sounds like Berlin Wall. The actual ideal model here, and again, I'm not asking them to adopt the ideal overnight, but we need to look to see whether they're moving in this direction. It's very simple. It's in history. It's called the Ellis Island model. The Ellis Island model is you allow pretty much unlimited immigration, but you process everybody. And you do leave out, you do prevent from entering criminals, terrorists, the diseased. It's the way Ayn Rand came into this country. And somebody, I think someone in the notes asked what was Ayn Rand's view of immigration. She doesn't have a lot of things she has said on immigration, but in the 1973 Fort Hall Forum, she was asked in a Q&A, and I have it in front of me, what's your attitude toward immigration? Doesn't open immigration have a negative effect on a country's standard of living? I'll summarize her answer. Her answer was, why are you collectivizing this into a country standard of living? She said that should really be irrelevant. Notice it's kind of a nationalistic standard. Her view is people have rights. They should be able to migrate, but she also defined the state as an institution with a monopoly on a legal monopoly on the legitimate use of force in a particular territory. So when someone like Trump or others says, well, if you don't have a border, you don't have a nation, that's true. So her view, I'm interpolating a little bit here, my view is you have to have managed borders. You have to have, that is a proper government function to figure out what is our borders, who are our citizens, who will come in or not. And you notice you don't get either of that. You get a false alternative of complete open borders and the chaos and anarchy, and actually, frankly, the inhumanity of what's going on now down there from the Democrat side. And on the other side, it's just a little bit too much closed border attitude, which strikes people as anti-American, you know, on the grounds that we were built by immigrants. That's true. So that would be a nice position for the Republican Party to start gravitating toward. But I don't really see it yet.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I know young people feel that, you know, so much of our tax money is going towards helping immigrants. And we just see the Democrats today wanting to house migrants in national parks. That's their latest ploy. Yeah. So I think you see this fear from young people, not just, oh, where are our jobs going, but like, where are our tax dollars going? And we're really struggling. And so I think you're getting this sort of maybe this overreaction of kind of, you know, closed borders due to this fear that, you know, well, the country's crumbling. And so what level of that is legitimate? And, you know,
and so, Abbie, notice one side feeds the other. Like one side is so crazy, the other side comes in and they want to be, you know, they're reacting against it.
Yeah. Well, the Democrats are like, what do you mean you don't want to house them in national parks? Do you have no soul? Like, there's got to be something in the middle between housing them. So we went, you know, they talked a little bit more about immigration, but then we have Ron DeSantis, who's technically the leader behind Trump, although he's only polling at 13.8%, I think. So he's pretty far behind Trump. And they asked him about banning the CCP from buying land. I know this is big. Everything is a big talking point. So Lauren's going to put that clip next.
Governor DeSantis, China invested $12 billion in Latin America just last year. They signed strategic partnerships with 7 countries, including Mexico. And China's military ties to the region now include arms sales and training exercises. Are you comfortable with China deepening ties with our southern neighbors?
Of course not. And the reason why we're in this mess is because elites in DC for far too long have chosen surrender over strength when it comes to the CCP. Some people in our country got rich, our industrial base got hollowed out, and they have been able to build the second most powerful military in the entire world. We need a totally new approach to China. We are going to have real hard power in the Indo-Pacific, like Reagan, to deter their ambitions. We're going to have economic independence from China, where we're decoupling our economy, and we are going to go after the cultural power they have in this country. As governor of Florida, I banned the CCP from buying land in our state. We should do that all across these United States. We shouldn't have them in our universities. We shouldn't have Confucius institutes. So you see a country in decline, our power's in decline. China's going to surpass us this decade, and if they do that, that's going to affect every single American household. You're president. I am not going to let that happen. I'm going to reverse this country's decline. We are going to choose strength, not surrender when it comes to the CCP.
Well, Abbie, full disclosure, as Jag said, I prefer DeSantis to all the people on this stage. I think I actually prefer him to Trump, but I don't know if he can beat Trump. If Trump is ultimately jailed, I mean, I think DeSantis would and made unable to run, which is possible. But DeSantis could be the front runner. Maybe that's why he's doing it, because of that last minute chance that he'll be the only one left standing. And I actually think he did the best in the debate, but I don't like this answer at all. Anyone who knows my views knows that I do not believe the U.S. should be antagonistic either toward Russia or China, nor do I believe that Russia or China is into undermining and sabotaging the United States. That is very much Cold War thinking. That is what they were trying to do in the 70s and 80s. They're not trying to do it anymore. They were defeated, everybody. You know, wake up. Reagan and Thatcher won. The fact that either of them, but mostly China, is becoming more economically prosperous, and therefore having a military, as any grown-up government does with it, does not mean they're trying to conquer us. Now, also, it's very common among conservatives, be aware of this language. They say CCP and they equate it with China. CCP is the Communist Party, and the Communist Party does run certain parts of China, but it is not China per se. And so to say I'm going to oppose the CCP, there's so many people in China that want to trade with us, that do trade with us, that, you know, stock the shelves of Walmart with stuff that Americans love. And this idea of buying land, it's not really the CCP buying land. It's Chinese companies buying land. And it's not really that much. I think the Republican answer here should have been Joe Biden is buying land. Joe Biden just took over half of Alaska. Joe Biden just took half of what the rim around the, you know, parts around the Grand Canyon. The U.S. now owns something like 13, 14, 15% of the Western states, 12 Western states. So the U.S. government itself is nationalizing lands and setting them aside so we can't develop them, so we can't get energy out of them, so we can't get uranium out of them. So, you know, of course, you don't want foreign aggressors invading your space, but I don't consider China a foreign aggressor. I'm really disappointed about this answer. And broadly, by the way, in the entire debate related to this, none of them were ever asked or said anything about the Trump trade wars, about the Trump tariffs, none of which have been repealed. I mean, against China and elsewhere. So the trade war goes on. The Biden administration endorses the trade war. So this idea, and then notice Ron DeSantis goes even further, decoupling the American economy from China. I mean, in a way, Trump 25% decoupled it because he put in tariffs of 25%. In a way, DeSantis is kind of saying, I'd put on 100%. Because that would like completely decouple, that would completely eviscerate any interest in trading with them. That is pure Hoover type Smoot-Hawley protectionism stuff, very, very dangerous stuff, not really good stuff. So that's moving in the wrong direction, not in the right direction. But see how difficult it will be for these people to stand up on the side and say, I think we should warm relations with China, not make them cooler. I think we should, you know, reduce those tariffs and start becoming trading partners again. You can see why it'd be hard for them to say that, but that really should be the direction they're moving in.
Yeah, I saw one of the Fox News contributors before the debate said Trump's policies, like his tariffs, were so popular with his base that nobody's going to touch it tonight. And then he was right. Nobody
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think, throughout, Nikki Haley then came on and said the same thing. We would totally end our ties with China, and then, they got in this debate where they all yelled at Vivek Ramaswamy about being on TikTok because it's owned by China. And so there was this, repeated, especially Nikki Haley and DeSantis, who are by and large, the favored candidates. They're not with you on this issue of tariffs.
Right. And notice also, when it comes to Russia, China, most of them are against closer relations with China. Most of them think China is a major enemy. Some of them wobble a little bit on Russia, like DeSantis and Vivek don't really want us helping Ukraine against Russia. All the other ones want us to go to war and vanquish Russia. But so there's that slight differential between them on Russia, China. But as someone brought up in the debate, the position that many of them have taken on Ukraine have brought Russia and China together.
Yeah.
So the ones like we just heard of, the ones who are really scared about China are looking at, well, why are we pushing Russia and China together? If you think China's bad, the combination of the two should be bad. But notice none of them are pushing for freer trade and reversing the Trump policies on tariffs and quotas, and Biden hasn't changed it at all.
Yeah. Well, I think that, the back and forth between Nikki Haley and Vivek is when he said, we shouldn't do anything, we shouldn't be pushing Russia. And she said, well, we have to because they're an ally of China. And then he said, well, you're going to push them towards China. And she said, a win for Russia is a win for China. And it was you're not seeing it from the same perspective. I wish they would have jumped right into that after this part, but they took a detour and they talked a little bit about crime and healthcare, education. I know we're kind of running low on time here. Is there any, between crime, healthcare, and education, is there any of the points, either Jag or Richard, that you really thought, you had really strong opinions on, anything they said on?
I thought Nikki Haley had a very comprehensive answer on healthcare costs and really getting into the nitty-gritty of these licenses and the various subsidies that are driving up costs. I also thought that in terms of talking about really more fundamental structural issues that are driving a lot of these problems, that Tim Scott, in talking about racism and slavery, really put a strong hit on the Great Society and how that has really shifted demographic patterns and contributed to familial breakdown in the African-American community, and how that's driving a whole bunch of different issues, including, lack of progress in education and crime. So.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing, Jag. I thought that was very powerful when Tim Scott, I hate to say this, talking as a black man. I mean, this is how the country sees it. But basically saying the black family is in great despair. The Democrats would agree, right? But then he basically says the Democrats did it. And to hear this coming from an educated black man, it must shock the hell out of the Democrats. And he said the Great Society program, that's LBJ. What was the Great Society program? Massive government funding of welfare. By the way, it included Medicare and Medicaid. So that's 1965. So that inflated healthcare costs. But yeah, he emphatically said, America is not a racist country. It's not a racist country. Stop saying that. And if there's any breakdown of the black family, it's because the U.S. government has become paternalistic. It's replaced the black father with daddy government. That was very powerful stuff. I think, Abbie, if you're trying to save time, I think your next three are crime, healthcare, and education. I'd be okay with skipping toward education, but I just want to say briefly, their answers on crime I thought were interesting, but they could have been tougher because none of them said crime is out of control because the Democrats said defund the police. No one used the phrase defund the police, but every American knows that was the clarion call of the Democrats in 2020, 2021, and we're feeling the ravages of that now, but they didn't really pin it on the Democrats, which is quite amazing. Republicans have a history of being for law and order. It's at least since Richard Nixon in 1968. We're kind of facing a 1968 all over again. There's mass looting, there's mass shoplifting, there's mob shoplifting, And the Republicans could have been much better here, saying we are the law and order party. This is outrageous. Small businesses and a whole bunch of other people being ripped off, and it's these George Soros DAs who are letting things off, and they're no cash, no bail, and all that. But so they were okay on law and order, but they didn't really pin the lawlessness going on today on deliberate Democratic Party. So I thought that was unfortunate. Let me just say quickly something on healthcare. Someone did ask Pence. They said, "Hey, when you and Trump got in, you said you would repeal Obamacare, and how come you didn't?" And Pence couldn't answer the question. He started talking about a whole bunch of other things. And on this score also, I would say, here's another case where healthcare has gotten very expensive. Yes, that's true. But none of the Republicans are willing to say kind of what Tim Scott says, namely, hello, Medicare and Medicaid. Hello, Health and Human Services. The government used to spend 5% on the healthcare spending in the country. It's now 55%. None of the Republicans step up and say the government is inflating costs. The government subsidizing all these things is ruining the industry. And when the costs inflate, guess what they do? They come in afterwards and they say, we need price controls. We need price controls on pharma. And Nikki Haley was particularly bad on this. Nikki Haley said, here are all the villains in the healthcare thing. Doctors, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies. And I'm thinking, oh my God, a totally anti-capitalist answer as to what is wrong with the healthcare sector. No, Nikki, the problem is the government is more and more invasively and subsidizing involved in the healthcare industry. But you can see why they're going to be very reluctant to say that. They need to come up with a plan, not to end Medicare and Medicaid and HHS overnight, but you need to phase these things out. These are the cancers. These agencies from the LBJ days are the cancers that are infecting the healthcare sector. And Trump isn't any better on this. Let's bring in Trump if we're going to remember. It's not like he has a better answer on this, but this is a real problem for the Republicans. If they find problems in the healthcare sector, including cost inflation, and are only going to ape what the Democrats say, namely, must be due to the capitalists, must be due to healthcare providers, gouging unsuspecting pay, that is just a losing. It's losing for America, but I don't know. Maybe they don't think it's a losing proposition for the Republican Party. But that's the fundamental answer. Yeah, do you want to go to education? You got some Nikki Haley stuff on education, which is amazing. Like the numbers on the kids who can't read and don't know, isn't it like 60 or 80%? Do you have that?
Yeah,
that's amazing. That exchange I thought was interesting.
The first education question, we can probably pull that up. I believe it's like exactly almost the 1 hour mark, Lawrence, as what I have here. So, but before, I did want to say, it was interesting because I had the question for you, Richard, of if Haley is the strongest candidate on healthcare, because her point was so powerful. I felt like she really, like Jag said, she really nailed it home. But it's interesting because right after her, for like a brief second before they cut him off, Doug Bergman did say, wait, there was subsidies. And then he was kind of
he did, right? But the Bergman, who is the lead, Bergen, I don't even know his name. He is a governor, but it's like a small state. So he actually, I found, and I was laughing because he's the only one who has this principle that if something is being inflated, and people can't afford it anymore, so it's either like tuitions or healthcare, right? He does know that it's because the government's been subsidizing it. But no one on stage is going to say, okay, I guess we better stop subsidizing it, because that sounds heartless. But he actually is right. Maybe the others know it. He's the only one who says it. But on the other hand, to really follow up, Bergman would have to say, we have to stop subsidizing these. And therefore and then they won't be inflated, and then they won't be unaffordable. But I noticed the same thing, Abby. That's a good catch.
Yeah, right. I had made a little note of it, but if we can play, well, we'll start, Lawrence, I think it's 111 is where we have the question about the Black and Hispanic students, and should we put them first? And we have some of those education answers there. And I think just before that is when they mentioned, 80% of students are not proficient in history and civics. That was the statistic there that was shocking. And then it was something like 30% are not where they need to be in reading by, third grade. And so Nikki Haley had a good answer there. So we can pull up that time spot there in between 1 minute and 1 minute 5, I believe.
Yeah, I think Nikki Haley's at 109.35.
There we go, 109.35. Oh, Richard, you got
for Nikki, yeah.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
2027. Parents can't wait 4 years for a fix. So what would you do right now?
Well, and school choice isn't the only answer, but I'll tell you, it's not out of a lack of trying that we didn't try and get school choice in South Carolina. What I'll tell you, first of all, is we have to acknowledge the fact that 67% of our eighth graders are not proficient in reading or math. Over 80% of our eighth graders aren't proficient in history or civics. And recently they came out and said our 12 and 13-year-olds are scoring at the lowest levels they've been scoring in reading and math in decades. So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to make sure we catch our kids back up. We have to make sure they can read. A child that can't read by third grade is 4 times less likely to graduate high school. We need to do reading remediation. We need complete transparency in the classroom. No parent should ever wonder what's being said or taught to their child in the classroom. We need to make sure that we have school choice so that there's competition. We need to move all the programs from the federal government down to the states and let states decide what education looks like in their states. Right. And we need to start building things in America again. Let's put vocational classes back in our high schools, and let's get our kids building the things that we know that we can make. When we start to focus on that and really bring in that parental involvement, that's when we'll start to see a difference. But we've got to get parents back included. We've got to quit spending time on this DEI and CRT and instead focus on financial literacy, on digital literacy, and on making sure that our kids know what they need to do to have the jobs of the next generation.
On the subject.
Well, I don't mind this answer. I like her vigor. I like her principles. I like, as Jag said, the standard of talk quickly and get your points across. Okay, broad picture here. Friends of Liberty listening to this should know in the background, the problem here is the government should not be involved in schools at all. Zero. Defund the public schools. Okay, none of the people on stage are going to say that. But let's just remind ourselves, when people are worried about the degradation of children's minds, it's due to the fact that there's public ownership of the means of instruction. Marx said socialism is public ownership of the means of production, the factories, right? We have today government ownership and control of the means of instruction. The Republicans should start recognizing that that has to end. We have to completely privatize education. We have to completely privatize schools. Now, what's happening is, what will happen is the conservatives will get up on stage and they'll say, well, we need a different kind of public school. We need some choice where you can choose between public schools, right? But that's just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's still going down. It's still ruining these minds. And the Republicans are going to have to fashion an answer. Again, that does not do this overnight, because people have to plan. But the ideal has to be, the government really should not be doing this. Not only should they not be doing childcare, they should not be doing education. And there are private schools, and there are private options, and there is homeschooling. So it's not a unattainable ideal. Let's have some policies that move us in that direction. But they have to say that on stage. They can't just sit up there and say, we would have a different kind of central plan, for our schools, or we would put it at the state level instead of the federal level. That's just a different kind of politics. We need politics completely out of schooling. It's so important, these impressionable young minds. You can't have government anywhere near them. But again, I'm trying to trace out something. I'm trying to abide by my original principles of don't harangue these candidates for not being exactly where we want to be destination-wise. I just want them to move in the right direction. And then to do that, you do have to name what your ideal is. And I think they're just nibbling at the edges here, and it's not really going to help.
Yeah. And I think, then they jumped back into, Putin and Russia. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit, Richard,
Yeah.
You kind of laid out the dichotomy, which of these candidates are for, aid and potentially military action, which are not. We have a clip. It starts with DeSantis, and he kind of waffles, he's not real strong.
Did a little bit, yeah. And
then
Abbie, I also think, Abbie, in the context of the things that were brought up, I think to myself, in today's world, what does a president mostly deal with? Foreign policy.
Foreign policy is a big
and military, right? And war. And so in many ways, this should have been way more important, including things like what the hell happened in Afghanistan? What happened with Iraq? A little perspective here. Commander-in-chief, right? Because we're interviewing Commander-in-chief. The military, like, what's going on here, and why are we doing with Ukraine? But the fact that it was a throwaway at the end, kind of weird. But maybe because the moderators thought they all agree. But anyway, I don't want to stop your clip. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think also because your young conservatives are so different than older conservatives, your neocons, I think they feel it's a real dividing point for the
So Abbie, are you saying, Abbie, that the younger conservatives, libertarians are more don't engage.
Don't engage. Don't
More
need
Ron
more
Paul type.
money.
Yeah.
Right. We don't need any more American sons dying in
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right, let's want to quick play that clip. We'll
Okay.
out here.
To fight one. Today, the Republican Party is at odds over aid to Ukraine. The price tag so far is $76 billion. But is it in our best interest to degrade Russia's military for less than 5% of what we pay annually on defense, especially when there are no U.S. soldiers in the fight?
It's in our interest to end this war, and that's what I will do as president. We are not going to have a blank check. We will not have U.S. troops, and we're going to make the Europeans do what they need to do. But they've sent money to pay bureaucrats' pensions and salaries and funding small businesses halfway around the world. Meanwhile, our own country is being invaded. We don't even have control of our own territory. We have got to defend the American people before we even worry about all these other things. And I watch these guys in Washington, D.C., and they don't care about the American people. They don't care about the fentanyl deaths. They don't care about the communities being overrun because of this border. They don't care about the Mexican drug cartels. So as Commander-in-Chief, I will defend this country's sovereignty.
But it's not a territorial dispute. It's never been a territorial dispute.
And 90% of the resources that we send over to Ukraine is guaranteed. It's a loan. It is not 90% of the money that we send over there is loan. Well, we can talk about this, but at the end of the day, 90% of the money that we send over there is actually in the form of a loan. It's not actually not be paid by Ukraine. It's paid by the NATO, our NATO allies.
So I think it's a good topic.
I think it's a really good topic too. But I will say, let's debate the fact that our national vital interest is in degrading the Russian military. By degrading the Russian military, we actually keep our homeland safer, we keep our troops at home, and we all understand Article 5 of NATO.
We have to level with the American people.
I thought you said something about waiting until your turn to talk. So hold on. So at the end of the day, I'm going to finish my, I'll be happy to
Go
debate
ahead,
this.
and then I'll respond.
I'll look forward to this one right now. So at the end of the day, when you think about the fact that if you want to keep American troops at home, attack on NATO territory would bring us and our troops in. By degrading the Russian military, we reduce, if not eliminate, an attack on NATO territory.
Finish that exchange. We have to level with the American people. We have to level with the American people on this issue. The reality is just because Putin is not Putin's an evil dictator does not mean that Ukraine is good. This is a country that has banned 11 opposition parties.
A win
that has
for
actually,
Russia is a
that
win
is not
for
true.
China.
We're driving
a win
Russia.
For Russia
excuse
is a
me.
win for China.
Excuse me, Nick. You'll have
but
a chance.
I forgot you like China. That's why you're.
You'll have your chance in just a moment. Yeah. The hurling personal insults isn't helping. China is the real enemy, and we're driving Russia further into China's arms. We need.
Probably good right there. So we got the whole exchange.
This to me, because of what I said earlier, is the most important part of the debate. And it came at the end and everyone was probably sleeping or drunk at that point. The reason it's important, I counted, but I know these candidates already, so I've already kept track of them. There are 3 who basically say this is wrong. It is wrong for America to risk World War III by helping this corrupt Ukrainian regime against Russia and expanding NATO toward Russia's borders. It's Trump, who's not there. This is actually Trump's view. Vivek Ramaswamy, who's articulating it here, but it's really also DeSantis's view that started that way, right? DeSantis said, we need to put an end to this. And I think it was very important that Ramaswamy said, listen, you may hate Putin, but that's not the same thing as Putin is a major enemy of the United States. So there's a lot of context behind here. We've had other webinars and clubhouses on TAS about this. Pro and con, by the way. One of the wonderful things about TAS is we have healthy debate about U.S. foreign policy. Me, David Kelly, Stephen Hicks, Rob Trzynski. My view has been that American self-interest does not involve helping Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine are both kind of corrupt, kind of unfree countries that are engaged in a kind of civil war, and it's not very pretty and it's not very nice, but let Europe take care of it, and we don't need to risk either World War III or those who worry about China pushing Russia toward China. But in this particular case, I think Christy Haley and all the others, I could name them, Scott. They're not as important. Pence, especially, they're very, very warlike about this. They really, the idea of, I want to degrade Russia. See, Russia hears this as, really? Apparently you're at war with us, primarily. And if that's true, we really need to vanquish Ukraine. That is what Russia's hearing. So when Russia hears from these Republican candidates, and by the way, from Democrats, we need to depose Putin. We need regime change. We need to kill Putin. I mean, this is the South Carolina senator, right, saying the same thing. Russia's view is all the more reason why we need to turn this place into rubble, into Ukraine, into rubble, into a demilitarized zone. Christie in this debate actually said, if we don't stop them now, Poland is next. I mean, they have this view. And he wants to resurrect the USSR. That's not true. Putin basically does not want NATO expansion to continue, does not want NATO on his border. But back to the Republican view, I think this is interesting because at least there's some variety, Abbie, within the Republican Party. And it's typically been more of the war party, and the Democrat has typically been the more peace party. Here we have a Democratic Party that's very warlike, wants to go to war with everyone, and part of the Republican Party does. And the only holdouts, and maybe the reason they hate Trump more than anything, is Trump basically says, I don't want to be in NATO. I don't want to be spending American blood and treasure on defending other countries. Let them defend themselves if they're really grown-ups. I think that's one of the reasons the establishment hates Trump more than anything. But on this stage, the only ones echoing that view are DeSantis and Vivek. Very weird, very interesting.
Yeah, and I know Jag has to leave us here, so thank you for joining us, Jag.
Thanks, Jag.
And before we finish up here, I just want to say, like, I know that every time I've talked to young people about this and they hear comments like, we need to degrade Russia's military, what they're hearing as young fighting age, men especially, is, I might end up, boots on the ground on Russian soil. And when Putin comes out, if you see any of his interviews, he will flat out say that it sounds like America's, some members of the American media and political sphere are trying to declare war on Russia. And he kind of teases this, what will happen if that becomes official. And I think it's treading a scary line. And I don't know if people like Mike Pence, do they mean what they say? Chris Christie, do they mean what they say? Do they really willing to go that extra mile to degrade Russia's military? That's a scary thought about how far that could go, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and there's some knowledge of the history, and maybe I think young people have some knowledge of the history of what. Wait a minute, I just heard that it didn't go very well for 20 years in Afghanistan. Sounds like we lost that. Sounds like the Taliban is still in charge, and it sounds like the military and the Pentagon are going woke. They're not really warriors anymore, but something else. They're interested in gender studies and things like that. So even if that was a proper goal, Abbie, which I don't think it is, the second question is, wow, is the U.S. military really capable of winning wars anymore? I mean, it sounds like we've lost the last 4 or 5 in a row with a tremendous cost involved. And then people starting to talk about maybe we should reinstitute the draft, because we might go to war. Yeah, I think young people might be thinking about what the heck?
Right.
Where are we going here?
I know we did a really interesting episode of Morals and Markets about why America can't win wars anymore. I'd recommend that one.
It was controversial. Yeah, it was.
Podcast. But I know, after this, we're running out of time here, but after this, they went, they talked about farmers and foreign policy. They had all these like little micro issues they talked about. Special operations in Mexico, terrorism. Like they had this weird moment where they talked about which candidates were truly prepared, to talk about terrorism. It was such an interesting.
Right. And some of them said we should basically invade Mexico.
Right.
And like go fight the cartels. I think that was Nikki.
Yeah, it was Nikki.
And Tim, was it Tim Scott?
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of sounded like send in the military.
Right, and the Univision moderator was like, they're allies, and like, what are you meaning here? Like he didn't really want to clarify. So, they talked a little bit about student loan forgiveness.
They did. I saw that. Yeah, very brief, very brief.
DeSantis, he didn't jump into it, but he said, one of his positions is like these colleges should be on the hook for, kind of fraud.
Right. Yes. Who said that? Who said that? DeSantis?
DeSantis, yeah, and he didn't.
DeSantis, yeah.
Full position, but I think it's an interesting one because then he's well, if they feel that they're on the hook, then they're going to, not expand the gender studies department,
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, I'm in university, but I think I could be objective enough to say Not only should there not be, a forgiveness of student loans, let people work out their own schedules. But yes, you could say these endowments, these billion-dollar endowments, might take a hit here and there for issuing degrees to kids who can't do anything with the degrees. They're very expensive degrees. If they default on their loans, what does it mean? It means they went out into the world with their degree and they couldn't do anything with it. That sounds like the product is not very good, or it sounds like they went through a field of studies that doesn't really work out. So maybe the colleges should be on the hook, because the colleges do benefit enormously by the government subsidizing and backing student loans. So the colleges benefit, the universities benefit from this. And maybe that's why tuitions are also inflating. We talked about that before. So when these defaults occur, when the students can't pay their loans, could it go back to the universities and say, you absorb the cost, not the American taxpayer? Because the Biden idea is the taxpayer should swallow it.
Right.
Not the universities, but the financial aid departments, but the taxpayers. That seems very unfair to most Americans.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see. I've thought that eventually you're going to get some lawsuits, like people are going to file lawsuits against the university for fraud. Yeah. And we're going to see how far that goes. And I've thought, one successful lawsuit against a university for fraudulent promises is going to be, that could be a major fallout for universities. But, I think we've come to our end of time here, but I figured we'd go one question real quick. And I think it'll be fitting to circle back to Trump a little bit. We had a question at the beginning. Yeah. At what, number of debates, or at what point is Trump hurting himself instead of helping himself by not joining the debate stage? I think that's a really good question. He has been very clever about when these debates occur. He has some other event which can, be looked at in concert with it or in opposition to it. That's kind of old-fashioned because anyone can look at these things in delay. But I've watched these interviews by Trump and these speeches he's giving. They're not really actually as focused as the debates are. In other words, the interviewers don't really give him the kind of questions. They're very interested in the scandals and the lawsuits and stuff like that. So he doesn't really get questions like the kind we heard on stage tonight. So answer to your question, I think if I were advising him, I would say, at some point when there's like 2 or 3 people on stage, that's all that's left. Not 7 or 8 or 9. It's time to join the party and discuss things. And I think from his perspective, the only relevant thing is who his VP candidate might be. And I don't think it's anyone on that stage. I think Trump has this kind of view that anyone challenging me is my enemy. Yeah. And so even though Nikki Haley might be a good VP, even though DeSantis, who I don't think should be his VP because they're both executive type A personalities. I think they shouldn't be in the same room together. They're good, nice rivals. They're like Reagan, Reagan Bush or Reagan Jerry Ford. But I think he's going to pick someone like Christine Noem is the governor of South Dakota, I think, who's been very supportive of him. So he likes people who've always supported him regardless. And she's way out in the West and she's very good and she's very articulate. But she'll be kind of, subordinate to him. She's perfectly decent. She's a good person. She's got a good philosophy. She's much more right-wing and pro-capitalist than Trump is. So we'll see. But I would advise him to eventually get on stage because I think Jag and you and others have noticed. Here was the first time at the Reagan Library where people are taking shots at him saying, why aren't you here? Right. Be respectful toward these Republican primary voters. Come here and make your case and trade views and, hopefully not do ad hominem. Stop the name calling. Come in here and talk about ideas. That'd be great. I think it would be really interesting to see because we did have a very ideas focused debate and it would be interesting.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I think will be interesting. Trump had a way of derailing people, just absolutely just getting them so off point that they didn't even know their own names. Marco Rubio thought his head was going to explode when he talked about his little hands. I know,
and Jeb Bush, the low energy candidate. I mean, Abbie, in many ways, you could say, I'm glad these first 2 debates didn't have Trump because there would have been a lot of name calling, a lot of mudslinging and stuff like that. And you could argue that, well, him not being on the stage, some ideas were discussed. And some interesting things developed, and okay, this is the group that's like after Trump,
right?
You know what I mean? They're auditioning for either Trump's going to lose and they'll be center stage, in 9 months, right? Or he's going to win and they'll be center stage in 4 years. In other words, this team and whoever comes in later is going to be relevant for at least 4 years from now. That's not a long time. Right. And Jag said it right up front, and I'll say it too. At this point, I'm rooting for DeSantis. I think all the criteria I named at the beginning. Do you have the right ideas? Are you moving in our direction? Are you a governor? Are you a governor of a major state with major accomplishments? I'm hoping for something like DeSantis versus Newsom, the governor of California. Very distinct philosophies, very distinct track records, both young. We're sick of these 80-year-olds, drooling on themselves at press conferences. And so from the standpoint of the young watching this, we want the younger generation to step forward, but they can't be vacant. They can't be unknowledgeable. They have to know their stuff, and they have to have governed with experience. That alone is kind of controversial. The establishment is supposed to be very experienced, very credentialed, very untrustworthy, but there is an argument for saying, no, you can't govern without some experience. Yeah. And governors do have that.
And it's difficult because your young people are really split on that too. Like I know my grandmother was saying, she's like, yeah, they need to have experience. And I was like, I don't want them to have any experience.
Right. Yeah.
Politics, 1 minute.
I don't want to, we can't have them part of the swamp. The swamp means, the swamp means you have a long resume. Oh, sorry.
Exactly. So it'll be really, I think I really like Vivek Ramaswamy. I think a lot of young people do. I think he's united sort of libertarian sentiment that you see.
Very much. Yeah.
But I don't think he has a shot in, at this time, but 4 years.
He does have that, but also I think the Trump success opened up the possibility, which I kind of like this possibility of people saying, wait a minute, I don't have to be a career politician. Right. I can jump into this kind of midstream, good ideas, gather smart people around me. I'm not sure Trump always did that, but and maybe I can pull this off because Trump basically obviously had no political experience. But my criteria of any executive experience of like running things, running big empires, I think, yes, he did that and knew many politicians over the years. So I think Ramaswamy has the kind of performative, young, very knowledgeable, as Jag put it, fast talking.
Yeah.
That puts people off a little bit, but he seems very genuine. And he's certainly a successful person in his business life as Trump was. So that is what emboldening him. And I kind of like that about Trump and Ramaswamy, that people from non-political areas are willing to step up and say, I love my country. I have principles as well. Here's what I'm going to do. And here's my argument. I kind of like that.
And it's the first time you're seeing a non-Christian, an explicitly non-Christian Republican candidate
good
do
point.
well.
Yes.
And even people like my parents who are very big on being for Christian parents, they like Vivek. They're like, man, I think he's really great. And as long as he does what he says, where he'll defend people of faith and defend, people,
I mean, that's a really good point. We had 7 people on stage tonight. They're the Republican Party. They're supposed to be white bread and old and men. It had 3 people, women, Indians, right, from different backgrounds, a black senator from South Carolina, of all places, saying that America is not racist. That alone for the American people to say, you and I are not into identity politics. I understand that, but from a thinking, well, what would the American people think looking at this? This is quite an interesting party. Right. Look at the variety they have, not only in identity, but in their policy positions. Yeah,
it'd be really interesting. I think it seems like a better direction to me, this group, than the last in 2016. So agreed,
totally, Abbie. Although I kind of miss Ron Paul and Ted Cruz, but that makes me sound old.
I was not around when
it was not. I misspoke. I said Ron Paul. I meant Senator Rand Paul.
Yeah. I do like Rand.
Who's still a Kentucky senator. Yeah.
I think he's got a good shot at a cabinet position.
Right. Yeah. Good ideas, but not really presidential in stature. That's true. But I think, do you think DeSantis looks presidential or seems presidential? I think he might have to grow into it.
I think he might have to grow into it. I think
could be. He needs more charisma.
Yeah. And that was, early on when people were saying, you heard these whisperings, he's going to really struggle because he doesn't have any charisma. And I didn't see that in him as a governor. And I was like, that's not true. He's got plenty of charisma. He's great. And then, early on in his campaign, he really stumbled and he's had a few moments on stage.
Yeah.
Words have got jumbled and he seems like an awkward guy. And all of a sudden,
right. Yeah. I think that's true a little bit. I think he'll grow into this. I think the more public appearances he makes, and he does have a kind of dry sense of humor, so he has to work on that. And but the thing he has that Trump, the thing I think he has that people were loving in Trump is pugnacious, willing to battle, willing to take on the media. I mean, Kerry Lake had this out in Arizona, but DeSantis has this pugnacious, battling kind of spirit. But the difference with Trump is DeSantis almost never engages in name calling,
Right.
in degrading the other candidate. He stays on the level of policy. And that's, I think, very powerful, because Reagan used to do that. Reagan would not degrade someone on personality. He would just zing them, with policy stuff and the charisma and stuff. And if it might take a couple of years for Ron DeSantis to get into that, but I think he's moving in that direction. He could be a Reagan-esque type person eventually.
I almost think not having Trump's support has affected his confidence a little bit. Like with Trump behind him, he seemed to have a lot of confidence. And then, coming up against Trump, it's like, how do you come up against somebody like Trump, who in terms of like those personal interactions is just so clever at what he does. I mean, he's not an idiot. I don't think anybody who says he's an idiot he's certainly not. He knows how to push his opponents. And I think Ron's nervous about that, but I think he did much better this time around than he did last time.
I do too. He has to kind of inject himself into the conversation sometimes, because they move away from him. I think Trump is making a mistake by bad mouthing him and calling him Ron de sanctimonious and things like that. I don't think that helps Trump at all. I know among the Trump lovers, they love it, but that is not good. And thankfully, DeSantis does not do that against Trump. Notice what he does do against Trump, which is very interesting. It's very subtle and it's very indirect. And he did it in this debate tonight. He basically says, I'm a winner.
Yeah,
I'm a winner. And he knows that Trump hates the idea of being a loser. So he'll tonight, we didn't show this, but tonight DeSantis said, or last night, DeSantis said, we've lost 3 in a row. And of course, the implication is one of them was Trump. One of them was the midterm elections, one of it. And I've been a winner in Florida. And not only did I win the first time, the second time I won by an even wider margin. And my policies are very different from California. My policies are very different from Gavin Newsom. So again, he's basically suggesting that Trump is behind us, and the future is basically Florida versus California.
Yeah.
Me versus Newsom. And I think they're both under 50.
Yeah.
I like that. They're not perfect capitalists yet, but they're different enough that would be interesting. If that's not going to happen in 2024, who knows what happens in 2024. But if that happens in 2028, America's going to have more of a choice, less of an echo.
Yeah, I agree. And I think DeSantis's track record is really his strongest piece. And people think
and if he loses this, which he probably will, if he loses this, what does it hurt him? He runs Florida for another 4 years.
Yep.
Builds up that track record, has an even better case in 2028, and either Biden wins or Michelle Obama comes in and makes things worse, and he'll have even a better case in 2028. He's got time. He's not that old. In today's world, apparently you can be president when you're 90. Apparently, so DeSantis has plenty of time.
When you sit on stage and you go, and I need to take a nap.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to bed. I'm going to bed now, he said to the press Yeah, I saw that.
Somebody in the chat just reminded us that DeSantis and Newsom are actually debating on November 30th.
Yes, apparently they agreed. Apparently Sean Hannity agreed on Fox to get them, and they both agreed.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We might, if you want to redo this one, that might be fun.
That would be really
redo this kind of format. When did you say it was? November? Was it November?
November 30th. So we've got some time to do this, and I think this is great. And
if you want to do it again, I'm willing.
All right. Definitely. Well, I think we could probably close out here unless you had any final comments for us before we head out. We will.
My final comment is to thank you so much for organizing this. I really like the idea of interspersing clips with commentary. Makes it more, multimodal. It makes it more interesting. And your setup of the whole thing was really excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you for being willing to join us. I asked you and you jumped on last minute. You do everything for us. And Lawrence, the man behind the camera, thank him for rolling with me. These clips
of course. Up. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yes, thank you guys for joining. Good night.